All right. Welcome to the Conspiracy Dad podcast. And if you're joining us for the first time, you probably assume it's a trio. If you're a fan of the show, you'll recognize there's somebody different here. I would like to welcome to the show my good friend, Mr. Les Hodge.
Hello.
I am not particularly tall, and he is not particularly short. It is that I only have two stools. And so he's sitting in a chair. I'm sorry, Les, if everyone watching this is like assuming you're very very short, but you're not. You're pretty average height. I mean, I'd say 5'9".
Average. I'm like 5'9", almost 5'10", depending on
5'10".
the shoes. Depends.
Do you ever wear cowboy boots?
Yeah, you'll push 5'10" if you
That'll do it.
Get some boots. I'll get on there.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Les and I used to have a podcast called The Less We Know Show.
Mm-hmm.
Which we could always resurrect if you want to. We did that for 2 years or something, and then just life got busy. I don't know. It was fun, but I think Nick bailed on it, and that really helped us. We lost steam.
Yeah, and
then I moved houses, so we lost the studio, and that made it hard to podcast without a studio. So anyway, glad you're here to join us, and today we're going to talk about. We'll get into it. I know you have an aside update on another bizarre story, but it's a it's a historical event, the Oklahoma City bombing, but we're not talking we are going to talk about the bombing, but more specifically, we're talking about a man who was associated with the bombing who died under very, very questionable, circumstances. And in my opinion, I don't know, the Oklahoma City bombing, and particularly Mr. Terrance Yeakey, who's the guy we're going to talk about, his story is like so obviously a cover-up. It's like if you look into it for like a second, anyone with like a shred of intelligence can go, that seems really bizarre. Like that would not be investigated more. That wouldn't be like headline news, huge story. So we'll get into Mr. Terrance Yeakey, but first you mentioned a headline that we noticed over, I think 2-3 days ago, about an airline worker getting mysteriously dying. Also,
yeah, I don't know if, let me double check. I'm pretty sure he worked. Oh, he was a Boeing. So he worked for Boeing. His name was John Barnett, and there's a big I think he's a congressional whistleblower, and basically he was saying that Boeing has been cutting a lot of its quality control and what's the word I'm looking for? Just their inspection process. Yeah. They've been cutting it back down, and it's all coinciding with all these like planes.
Didn't they have a big crash
doors blowing off?
A window come off in mid-flight or something.
There's been a bunch of stories, and there's also another conspiracy that's adjacent. That's a whole nother topic about.
Are you talking about MH370?
No, okay. But there's a conspiracy that's a little more basically saying that part of the whole airline thing that's going on is designed to get people to stop flying because of the WEF and the climate change, basically.
Yeah.
Because there's really no good way to defend it or to do it. You can't put solar panels on the planes. And
you have so many more options with Zoom and like why do you need to take a business trip?
But they're trying to, part of the degrowth initiative is they're trying to cut back on airline flights, or just flights in general, because it's just a ton of gas and carbon essentially. But anyway,
they're not cutting back on any of the private airliners.
No,
it's only on the public.
For us, not for the important people. Important people have places to be.
Zipping along.
The Bill Gates is not cutting back at all on any of his flights. Neither is Mark Zuckerberg.
But anyway, this guy was a whistleblower who I saw a clip of an interview, 10 or 15 minutes of him talking about just some experience he had where they went and found a bunch of problems with this plane, and he found so many problems the next time
was he actually associated with a case, like an investigation?
He was an inspector.
Oh, okay.
He's like a safety inspector.
Was there an investigation happening? Or
yeah, he'd already testified.
Okay, that's what I meant. So
he's on the record, which is kind of one of those things, which is something I'll bring up when we start talking about Yeakey as well. That's kind of not the exact same thing, but something that just sort of, well, we'll get there. But he was he had given like 3 days ago, he had gone and he's given interviews. You can find him on podcasts and stuff,
Mhm.
kind of talking about what happened. And he was found shot in his own truck in Charleston 3 days ago.
What's his
Slipped
name?
in the shower and fell on some bullets, kind
Right.
of thing, you know?
So it was just one of those things where a lot of people were saying,
No, I mean, was it when he was shot? Was he like shot in a way?
well, they were
that's,
saying
like,
he
not
killed
possible?
himself, I think. I don't have all those details yet.
Okay.
So, but it is one of those things where like you'd asked me last week if I wanted to come, and I was like, yeah, I'll come do this. And we started talking, and we kind of talked about it. And then right as, I'm kind of starting to refresh my memory on all this stuff. It's like, oh, here's a guy who was
Vince Fostered.
right. Who was
Yeah.
all of a sudden everyone's like, that's really weird because like when of course, we can talk about this too when we get into Yeakey, like there's not always signs that someone's going to commit suicide. It's one of those things like it's awful. And so, but I mean, that's not, there's plenty of other things to talk about, but like, I've personally have known people and have friends that have known people that just, they were there and then one day they weren't. So I know that that kind of thing can happen. There's a lot of other stuff, but like if you watch him in the interviews and stuff, he doesn't seem like a particularly like emotional or like he seems like
again not always a hard fast
right.
rule.
It's just that's just take it for what it's worth.
Did he publicly say something like, "I'm not depressed. I'm not," like how some people like kind of clearly state, "I'm not suicidal in case I get Epsteined." You know what I mean?
Yeah, I didn't know. I haven't looked into it a ton, and there's not a bunch.
Which, for the record, I'm not suicidal.
Right.
Are you particularly suicidal right now, Dave?
I'm in a pretty good place.
We could just
right
publicly go on the record that the three of us do not feel like killing ourselves right now.
Right.
So if it does after this podcast, if the Oklahoma Police Department decides to do something to us,
Would have been a totally different podcast if one of us would have answered yes.
Yeah.
Just
it's like the mood changes. And
exactly.
oh, I'm sorry, man.
Well,
Like,
okay.
well,
Well,
do you want to talk about it?
maybe we'll, yeah.
So we
Got
usually,
some dad hacks for you.
yeah. I was gonna. Well, that's what I was going to transition to. So, what was the guy's name though? That
John Barnett.
John Barnett.
Yeah.
And
He's
it's
pretty
ongoing.
Google.
he
I
was
just found
he
out.
was
Yeah, there's been a ton of stories about him. I don't know if there's a ton of detail yet, but it is being widely reported.
Yeah, I just
So-
Googled Boeing whistleblower and then in Google said found dead. And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's probably the one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Did you guys see the story about the French first lady being a transsexual?
No.
No,
Did you see that?
no, I didn't.
Candace Owens did a story a couple of
Okay.
days ago, which, yeah, she can be a little bit. But anyway, I mean, she's bright.
Yes.
I mean, she went all in. That's kind of what's remarkable about it. Like, she's like, that's a man.
yeah.
And it's like everyone was, I think it's a big story. There's a protest in France right now with
Mhm.
people marching with wigs and stuff on, saying like she is a man. That's I guess that's the thing. And I don't know, but it has more to do with journalists were speculating about it and literally being arrested and like,
Yeah.
harassed by the government. And it's like, well, if it's not true, why wouldn't you just say that's not true?
Yeah.
Why do you got to start
Mhm.
arresting journalists because they, speculated that it
It's
might
like
be the case?
Tucker Carlson a couple weeks ago said something like, well, they care enough to lie about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, so anyway, I thought that was interesting because, I mean, if that turns out to be true, that'd be a wild story.
The French.
Well, I don't think it's as wild as Justin Trudeau being Castro's son. Have you ever seen the stuff
Yeah.
with that? And there's pretty
He looks exactly like
it's pretty
Castro.
convincing. There's a whole story where like
He looks
his
nothing like
parents-
his father, and he looks exactly like Castro.
and his parents were like swingers in
Yeah.
the 60s or whatever, and then they have like they took trips
Mhm.
like down around Cuba and stuff, like, and it's like, oh, that's weird.
What's more
Yeah.
believable? Castro is, Trudeau is Castro's son, or Emmanuel Macron's wife is actually a guy? What's more believable? Pull up pictures of both, and you'll probably be like, she's a dude. I don't know. I mean, if we were in France right now, though, they'd be arresting us just for
Yeah.
saying that. Thank God we're American. Thank God. I'm serious. We'd be in trouble. So let's talk about the.
Oh, are you guys gonna do dad hacks?
Oh yeah, dad
You
hacks.
want to do that, or
You got a dad hack?
Um, Yeah.
You
the
could do a
one-
non-dad hack if
Yeah,
you think of one.
And this one is one I'm working on that I found works in adult life. I used to work with a buddy of mine that we had problem customers. Every business you're in, you got problem customers.
Mm-hmm.
And the best tactic that we found to deal with them is like I didn't expect this wasn't a deliberate tactic, but every time that um this lady would come in the shop, we would roll our eyes, and then you got to deal with her, and she's kind of annoying and complains about small things, whatever. And then at some point my buddy was like, yeah, because it was a team of females that like worked, they had their own business and they were our clients, and we made some crack about they probably share husbands. And that got a laugh, but then like every time she came in when they left, we'd be like, yeah, go trade with your husband again, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then what I found was like it just on a subconscious level, I like my brain was associating laughs with when she came in. And after like 6 weeks, she came in and I was really friendly to her and really didn't mind seeing her.
Right.
So now I'm starting to try that with my kids, like not such an R-rated topic, but if
Mhm.
they've got something that bothers them at school, or if somebody like cuts us off in traffic, I try and come up with a ridiculous scenario to associate with that. And it doesn't need to be true. In
Right.
fact, it's better if it's not. Just come up with something ridiculous. And so that's been my trick, is just
Yeah.
say that you're sharing husbands.
Okay, mine is I totally didn't expect this, and I don't know how we even got started on it, but it's affordable, and if you have young kids, it's worked with mine. I don't know if it would work with other families. You could try it on your kids and see, but for some reason, like maybe a month ago, on Amazon, the Brady Bunch popped up as a viewing option, and my kids wanted to watch it. So I thought, oh, because I actually never watched the Brady Bunch growing up. We didn't
Right.
have Kate. I don't know. I just never watched it. I was too young, I guess. And then, so we started watching from episode 1 of the Brady Bunch. And it's like culturally interesting to watch because you can kind of see where the heads of, everything was back then. But
Mm.
then I'm blown away at how much they love it. They absolutely love watching the Brady Bunch. They will watch a marathon of a season of the Brady Bunch and they think it's hilarious, even though it's like the most like milk toast, like, like not,
Yeah, yeah.
but that's kind of what I like about it. Like it's
Yeah.
actually very wholesome. It was a good show. I never watched it, but I see now, like
Mm-mm.
it was obviously a good show and it was made for young families and kids. And yeah, it's free on Amazon.
Yeah,
I'll look
like
at that.
we've been showing our kids The Office, which
Mhm.
face value, you're like totally wholesome, no problem. It was on Thursday nights on NBC. And then inevitably you end up on like,
That's what she said.
yeah, she
Right.
said joke or something that's like a sexual harassment bit. And all of a sudden you're like, this just got weird in front of my not quite teenage
Yeah.
kids. Yeah. So having one that you can count on.
Yeah, I mean, and I even because I didn't know because I didn't watch it, I even did like a Google search of like, I mean, that was just researching the show real quick, and it was like that was the criticism that they had of it back then was, well, they just wouldn't push the envelope and they kept everything very family friendly. And I was like,
That
at
sounds
least
okay.
somebody,
Yeah.
we could use a little more of
Yeah.
that today. I
Right.
mean, it's not the end of the world.
That was a very dad thing to say. Not that I disagree, but
Yeah.
you're right. Like, yeah, that's kind of
Pendulum
alternative.
has swung so far the other way that it's like I would
How about
I'd really like to turn them loose watching something that I just kind of know it's not it's gonna be fine.
Yeah. Mhm.
Anyway, now
And-
you're not a dad, but you got a hack, a non-dad hack.
I don't. I can't think of anything offhand.
Well, if it
I'm
comes
trying
to you during the
think.
podcast,
All
we
right.
always circle back and
That's right.
and do that. So, all right, those are dad hacks for the week. And now let's talk about the Oklahoma City bombing. This is interesting because we're in Oklahoma. I was in, I believe, 5th grade when it happened. I remember I lived in just south of Norman, Oklahoma. So I remember that my teacher's husband, who we went to church with her, so we were kind of close with him, even though we went, public schools, we just happened to go to church together. And her husband was supposed to be in the building when the bomb went off. And she told us this later, but he was stuck in traffic
Wow.
and didn't make it to his meeting in a very strange way. And I remember the whole class, like we made a big poster to send with our handprints and like send to the first responders and ground zero that they would call before 9/11 happened. And yeah, I was old enough to remember a lot of it, but also young enough to not realize how strange that is.
Yeah.
And not like I didn't realize you normalize an event like that when you are in the middle of it. And it wasn't till I was probably in my 20s that I was like reflecting. And I read that Jana Davis book about and spoke to her, she was a reporter on the scene. And that was kind of the conversation I had with her was like, you know, Jana, you realize as a young Okie who grew up in this, it's really strange. And she was sympathetic to it. Like, yeah, when you're a kid, you don't,
Things just happen.
I guess I just assume like, well,
Yeah.
most cities probably have buildings that get blown up.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
That's exactly what I was thinking. You said that before when you're in the middle of a pivotal moment.
When you're in the middle of
realize how strange
a
it is.
current of a river, you
Yeah.
don't realize how fast it's moving. It's only when you come back that you go, whoa.
Yeah.
And so do you guys recall like where you were or what the circumstances of that? I mean, you're way older than me, so you got to remember.
Way.
I was at the office.
Yeah.
No, I was a little further along in school, but same as you, kind of like, well, I guess that's just a thing that happens in every state. Federal buildings get blown up. And I think anytime it got brought up, it felt like it was only in Oklahoma that we talked about it.
Yeah.
And today when I was listening to just a widespread of YouTube stuff and podcast stuff, it was like, it was getting covered overseas.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was a much bigger deal than I realized at the time.
That's kind of what Jana Davis said that like when I said that to her was something like you don't realize a lot, and this will get into the conspiracy, is that the reason that I think a lot of us Okies kind of went along with everything was the news coverage that we were receiving about what was going on was pretty different than what people outside of Oklahoma were receiving. And some of that has to do with the news stations and ownership of those news stations, them getting bought up in the middle of this whole thing.
Yeah.
So, do you have any memories of
Oh
it?
yeah, I remember because I feel like I was like
How old were you?
like 9th grade maybe.
Okay, that's definitely
Like 8th, 9th grade,
That's
something like
right
that.
about there, yeah.
But I had a science teacher, and he was former OKC SWAT, and so he knew people that were there and immediately after there, and so it was kind of like, you know, it sounds like very similar to you, like the personal stuff almost kind of supersedes the kind of bigger national narrative, because like in that moment, which, you know, he was an interesting guy anyway, but like he had such an inside kind of knowledge that we were watching it on TV in the classroom. And I remember he was calling out the bad stuff on TV as they were talking about it. Cause like somebody
what do
said,
you mean by bad stuff?
well, not bad stuff, but
like the extra bombs in the rubble.
no, like
was
somebody
bad,
said it was a boiler. And immediately he was like, that's not a boiler.
Yeah, no
He's
way.
like, there's no way that's a boiler. He's
Okay.
like, that was something big, probably here.
Like he
you
just
know?
knew from looking at it.
He just-
you
yeah.
blew a building up.
Right. He was
It
like,
takes a lot to
yeah.
do
He's
that.
like, this was not a gas explosion, or he's like, that was an intentional, like he was on it. Like he was calling stuff.
That's pretty
It was
interesting.
really interesting. And then hearing, you know, as the days followed, like he was talking to people that he knew that were there, you know, in the cleanup and in the aftermath of it. So it was very vivid.
I feel like even right now, like when you're in the middle of like criticizing it, or like that's part of what was going on, and that's part of what I want to talk about is like, I get it. Like even now, like if I say things like there were multiple bombs reported in the rubble the day of, it was not like that's very strange. But people around here will like, they'll tell you to shut up if you even say that.
Yeah.
Like if you know, in Jana Davis's case, like I talked to her about doing a documentary about her book, and she was just like, look, I can't even go to the Oklahoma City Memorial. They will call the police if I show up. And if you think about that, that's nuts.
Yeah.
A reporter who was on the scene the day of the bombing writes is critical of the narrative. Is just she does not believe that the story that they told the public is true, that there's just arguably just not true. And they'll call the police if she even shows up to just to be there, like not
Yeah.
like she's even protesting. That's strange. You know what I mean? Like what are we dealing with? I mean, hopefully I'm thinking now enough time is almost 30 years has passed that it's like,
Mhm.
can we talk about it yet?
Right.
Can we please address if you think, maybe there were not multiple bombs in the building, but you can very easily look up broadcast coverage of the day of the bombing and reporter after reporter saying first responders have been pulled out. Another explosive has been found in the rubble.
Yeah.
Not
Mhm.
just one, I think 3 total.
Mhm. Yeah.
3
Mhm.
times they pulled back. You can look up interviews with first responders like saying like they're devastated because they're like, they told us we have to leave because of an explosive in the rubble and they didn't want to leave. They're like, no, we had to
Mhm.
leave these poor people trapped in this rubble. And I don't know, maybe you guys have heard somebody I've never heard anybody explain what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's my biggest problem with Oklahoma City. John Doe number 2, no explanation.
Mhm.
Multiple bombs in the rubble, no explanation. Lost closed caption videotapes from across the street, no explanation. It's just like, and I think it's because in Oklahoma, everybody's so traumatized by it. So
Yeah.
everybody's like, they just want to move on that they don't. And it's such a shocking thing to see and experience that people couldn't stop and just go, whoa, we need an answer. Like
Mhm.
you cannot have the largest manhunt in FBI history and then just pretend like it didn't happen and just say it'd be something if they gave us an explanation. But the fact that there's they just say, well, he's a ghost.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. I mean, how is that acceptable? That's why we do this podcast. So, do you want to give kind of? I'm assuming that a lot of people know what happened in the Oklahoma City bombing, but could you give like a brief rundown of the federal government mainstream narrative of what exactly happened in Oklahoma
Sure.
City
So
in 1996, right?
95.
95. That's right.
April 19th, 1995, the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. There was an explosion roughly around 9 a.m. Just like you said, there were reports of multiple bombs, up to 3. But even just now, when I was kind of doing a quick search through the Wikipedia on the Oklahoma City bombing,
Which, for the record, is run out of Langley.
yeah,
Is
yeah. So
absolutely censored and
the
totally
way
100% correct
they
all the
make
time about everything.
they make reference to multiple bombs, but it's more just like there were claims that there were multiple bombs.
Yeah, on camera by people
Which you
standing
can-
next to the bombs.
Which I was gonna say, which is factual because we don't have the bombs in an evidence room that we know of, so you can say there are claims.
The reason I bring this up too is that I think this might have something to do with the death of Terrance Yeakey.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We can get into that when we
Yeah,
get
yeah.
to his story, but keep going with the explanation.
Yeah, I mean, just going off of memory, partly because it's a lot of Wikipedia to get through, but yeah, the narrative, the kind of standard narrative is that Timothy McVeigh was part of an alt-right group. This was kind of a act of revenge for the Waco event 5 years prior
In Ruby Ridge.
Ruby Ridge. Was it? And Ruby Ridge. Yeah, yeah. And so the idea was that this was some kind of a retribution against the ATF. So this is why there was an attack on a federal building.
Strangely enough, the ATF was not in their
Right,
office that
yeah,
morning,
so-
even though that was the target, I
Yeah,
guess.
big swing and a miss
Yeah.
on that one. If that's what you were going for. Timothy McVeigh was picked up about 60 miles north of Oklahoma City within like that same morning, just on a traffic stop.
I think within like an hour.
Yeah,
of the
it wasn't
Yeah.
very long after, but there was the big manhunt for a John Doe number 2, and if you do any looking around at the Oklahoma City bombing, you'll see sketches of a almond eye shaped, olive skinned fella that he never materialized. Timothy McVeigh was convicted, and since he was put to death, he was executed for
No,
that ultimately.
Allegedly.
Oh, he wasn't executed. He was killed in prison, right?
No, he was
Oh, no, I
executed.
think
No,
it
he was
was-
executed.
Oh, yeah,
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 he went to
yeah.
death row.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
So, I mean, that's kind of as far as like if I were outside of Oklahoma and somebody asked for a Cliff Notes version, that's kind of the standard narrative.
Okay. So you could do a whole other podcast about Oklahoma City bombing that
Yeah.
would take up a whole episode. But in the midst of all of that, we want to talk about Officer Terrance Yeakey, who was an Oklahoma City police officer and was one of the first people on the scene the day of the bombing. And his story is shocking to research. There's a video on Corbett Report that you can look up. He did called Requiem for a Suicided Terrance Yeakey. And it's, I mean, if you wanted to dive into all the bits, nuts and bolts of the story, go watch that. But if you do watch it, it's shocking because he's interviewing family, he's interviewing friends, he's interviewing, there's a lot in there. The thing that I couldn't get over was, yes, people commit suicide. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what Oklahoma City police said it was a suicide. They didn't do an autopsy. The circumstances of his suicide are just so bizarre. It just stretches the imagination to think that was a suicide. He was found in off a side road in El Reno, which is outside of Oklahoma City. It slit his wrist, both wrists, and slit his throat, blood everywhere in the car, and then crawled half a mile into a field over a barbed wire fence and shot himself in the back of the head.
Yeah.
And no gun was ever recovered.
Well, they did recover the gun, but it was
Not in the
it's
field.
not
though.
like, typically.
Did they actually recover the gun?
Yeah.
Where?
In that field, but it was far, far away. I mean, when you think of someone shooting themselves, typically the gun's right next to them. It's not like you've got, especially if you just crawled across a.
Well, I guess, and there's enough like there that like just that you would think you would do an autopsy. Like,
Yeah.
like whatever the circumstance, you would go, why on earth would you not do an autopsy of that? Why would you, just immediately say that was a suicide? But they did, and that's what happened to him. But so that's his demise, I guess. Let's go back to kind of more of the story of what was he doing leading up to that, which makes all of it even more strange because, I get it. Like I'm sure witnessing something like the Oklahoma City bombing, obviously you're going to be traumatized and sick to your stomach over some of the stuff you saw, but his former wife, there's an interview with her on a local Oklahoma City radio station that is and it's a fascinating interview, and she goes on and about what exactly happened. And his wife doesn't think he committed suicide. His mother doesn't think he committed. His sister doesn't think he committed suicide. I mean, everybody connected with him is pretty adamant about somebody killed Terrance Yeakey, and it just seems strange to me that there wouldn't be more of an investigation. If I talk to you about it, I think, and tell me what you think, but it's like, yeah, like I could, like if I committed suicide tonight, or that was the story. I mean, you guys, what if you like knew? You're like, no, there's just the circumstances don't make sense. I literally said, like, people are chasing me and I'm in danger and I need you to, take care of yourself. And then that all happens. And then you go like on a mission where you're like, I swear I'm going to make sure TPD knows he did not commit suicide.
Yeah.
And everyone just kind of goes, I'm sorry, you're just being emotional. He committed suicide.
Right.
That's essentially what they did to him. And his family they told his family, like, you have a bit of a wild imagination, and they couldn't, I think to this day, I don't think they could get anyone to look into his death.
It's feasible if you're on the side, like the law enforcement side of it. I'm sure it's pretty common for family members to refuse to believe or to want to believe that their family member committed suicide. So, and it's, not exactly, but kind of just another day in the office for you on that side of the desk. And so you're kind of like, can I just please get this? Now I realize Terrance Yeakey's a little more high profile than other suicides, but
well,
I guess I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just cut you off. So
no, all I was thinking is just any line of work you're in, when somebody comes in and it's their first time to deal with what is your line of work, you're like, just
Right.
let me handle whether this was a suicide or not.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It
go ahead.
just seems to me that the fact that he was a cop is enough to where they would at least, dot the I's and cross the
Yeah,
T's.
it could be unrelated to the Oklahoma City bombing. It
Right.
could be like some guy he arrested, like somebody just had a
Exactly.
revenge thing
Sure.
for him and they wanted to kill him.
And so to me, it's another case, and I think we mentioned something about this earlier, but like all they had to do was investigate it and put out the results.
Mhm.
Because it's like, even today, I didn't have a ton of time. I listened to the Corbett, and then I read a couple of mainstream articles, which is really funny because you can read
the CNN article. Did you
there's
read
a
that one?
CNN
Yeah.
one that's actually pretty
It's very
interesting.
good.
They actually
In 2021.
Yeah,
It,
they
took
actually-
a long time to.
yeah,
But they're saying a lot of what we're saying, which
Yes.
is that is definitely a suspicious death.
and they have a lot of background, and they have a lot of quotes from the clip that's on that from his wife on that old radio show, and then that's also in the Corbett video. But it's just one of those things where it's like, just show what happened,
Mhm.
and it puts it to bed. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, just do an autopsy.
right. And so it comes to anyway, it's just a weird thing where it's like, you would think that given who he was specifically,
Right.
and this was their colleague, this was their guy, that they would just
I guess
publish the results.
that
and
would be
show what
my
happened.
conspiracy about it. And
Yeah.
I would say just the fact that you refused to investigate this as anything but a suicide is
Or just
very
document it.
telling that you wanted this guy dead for some reason.
It-
Whatever, it could be related to the bombing or not, but I think the Oklahoma City police wanted him dead and they didn't want
Mhm.
anyone talking about it.
Well, we should go back like toward the beginning and sort of.
Yeah, do you
'cause
mind? Do
there's-
you know the story well enough? Do you want-
Basically,
Okay,
yeah.
run through it.
So essentially, he was one of the first guys, one of the first people there, and he was in the building pulling people out. And pretty early on, I think he fell through a floor, or he was moving a guy, and he injured himself, like he hurt his back. And so it's funny because the two articles that I read today were a New York Times one and then the CNN one. The CNN one is actually pretty thorough, and it gives it everything we're talking about here is in that article. And the New York Times is like the complete other version. And so it is a good, just in any case.
That's interesting because that New York Times bought Channel 4.
Oh, okay.
Like that's the weird thing about Jana Davis's story is that in
Right.
the middle of all of that, the New York Times and that parent company, whoever it is, came in and bought up the TV station, and then she
Mhm.
was told to shut up
Right.
about her investigation and move on.
Well, I think it's an excellent lesson.
Yeah.
Just to read these two historically and notoriously left-wing
Mhm.
mainstream sources, and you can get two different stories completely.
Yeah.
Because if you read the New York Times one, I guess if you wanted to like steelman the argument for he really committed suicide, the idea was, and the way they put it in the Times article was, he was actually depressed that he couldn't help more because he got there early and then he got hurt, and so he couldn't help, and he saw this horrific thing happen, and then it just tore him up until he basically had a psychotic break and crawled over a fence and did all these
Yeah.
other things where that narrative kind of falls apart. But just to talk, just to say, okay,
Sure.
maybe he's just a guy that he lost it. He went through this horrific thing and then, basically snapped. And so you can read that and they sort of write it off as, and they say a bunch of stuff that like is totally refuted. But like they were saying, because there was like, he had split from his wife originally.
Right.
And in that article, they say that she accused him of abuse basically.
Mhm.
And that he had violated a restraining order and like a bunch of stuff. And then like, if you listen to her,
No, you shouldn't sound like that.
that's not, and
Yeah, no.
it's not what she said at all. At least not
Not on
afterwards.
that interview.
Yeah.
And
no,
so-
she
and-
sings his praises. They had their issues, but he was
Yeah. And so
a great guy.
it was really interesting to read because I
It
wanted
is,
to read like what are they saying? I want to make sure I'm not omitting some huge thing.
Yeah.
But like yeah, you read that New York Times thing and you're like, oh, if you just read this, you would not have any
Mhm.
of the story, or at least you would have no idea that there was any inkling of any kind of.
Just a quick search on it. Just the titles of the articles.
Mm-hmm.
New York Times: policeman who rescued foreign bombing kills himself.
Mm-hmm.
CNN: why did this cop turn up dead?
Right.
I mean,
So it was. It
What
was
year
really
was that
interesting.
Times article done?
the Times 96.
Oh,
So that
so
was in-
yeah,
But it
right
is
after.
quite
That
a
was
long
That was
cover.
right when
Yeah.
they had been ordered to shut down any dissenting opinions
So
from Bill Clinton himself.
so anyway, back to the story. So he got injured, and he over the next, I think it was a year or so total.
Yeah, he was killed in 96.
Right. So he or yes, a little over a year, I guess, or give or take. So he along that time he started to kind of get paranoid. He started basically.
Well, and then part of it was because he initially filed like a 12-page or a 9-page report
Right.
on what happened that day. And his chief, like the leadership of the police department was livid. This is according to his wife, that they were like you making him file a new report, and like they were like, it needs to be a 1-page report. And
Right.
she was even saying like, it's pretty strange to have that long of a report unless you're really reporting something that's serious, you know?
Mhm.
And I think she said he never shared that report with the long report, but that's what he was upset about with his own department, is that he's saying and telling his ex or his wife too, the story that they're telling us, that's not how it happened.
Right.
That's not true. There's things that happened that morning that they're omitting from the mainstream narrative, and they didn't want to accept his story. And that was maybe what set him down this path of whatever was going on, that he felt like he was being followed. He felt like people were messing with him and his wife and trying to intimidate them. But he was outcast within his own police department.
And he was due to get a Medal of Valor,
Right.
like within a week, I think, of being found dead. So they were still publicly holding him up.
Yeah.
And he was like a dare officer, and like he was very well liked from everything I've read. And so, but yeah, the first thing he said or his wife said, the first thing he said when he got in the car was basically, it didn't happen the way they're saying it happened. It's not what happened.
Especially after she picked him up from the hospital.
Yeah, first on the day of. So from the day of, it wasn't like whatever happened or whatever. Even if he was making some kind of mistake or you know what I mean, like processing something wrong. Like the day of, he was saying it's not what they're saying it is.
Right.
So he immediately was already on that track. It wasn't something he came to over weeks where he didn't look into it on his own. That was his reaction to what he saw that day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so the weeks go by, and pretty much it kind of comes to a head, and he starts showing up at her house late at night, but she doesn't seem like, I think that's where they're getting the restraining order thing. This is just my kind of trying to extrapolate from sources, but they were saying that him showing up was part of it, but she wasn't reporting him for that. She reported because she was worried about him. She called the police, but she didn't call.
And in the interviews that she gives, unless she's just completely changing her tune, she doesn't describe him as that. She is saying that he was changed, like he was upset, like all those things are true, but she wasn't describing him as like a danger to her. If anything, he was the opposite. He was like, trying to make sure their insurance was in order.
Right.
Like if I die, even saying things like, if something happens to me, I need to make sure that you're taken care of, because he could feel that he was in danger, I think. And he was.
And I think it was the last time that they saw each other, he was trying to see if she would marry him again for that reason, for the kids and all that stuff.
Yeah, that was the story I heard from that interview with her. She's saying he started showing up late at night, which is not like him.
Right.
He wouldn't show up unannounced. And then, at 2 a.m, he shows up and wants to get married specifically.
Like
Dante
leave right
said,
now. Yeah.
Let's get these documents signed so that you're on paper, you're my wife in case anything happens to me.
Yeah. And then she said that he had grabbed a VCR and thrown it into his car.
The kind too that has 2 decks to make copies of videotape.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
It was And I don't think that she ever saw what was on the tape that he was copying, but
And
he,
never saw the VCR again.
yeah,
Right.
and somebody stole it and
Yeah.
out of their car, I think. And then another weird thing happened that shortly after the bombing, they tried to go back down there. He insisted that the
Right.
two of them go back down to the bombing site at night. Excuse me, because he was saying he didn't want them to be recognized. And they went down, and he told her specifically he took a camera and he said he needed to get photos of the nursery. And something we skipped over, but the most horrific part of the Oklahoma City bombing was where the bomb went off was right under the nursery of family and workers at the federal building, and 16 children were targeted and blown up. And even the mainstream narrative says that Timothy McVeigh targeted. He was trying to kill those kids. Like that was how evil that was. And Terrance Yeakey was saying, there is something underneath that nursery that I need to get evidence of. I need to get pictures. They go back down there. When they're there, they run into somebody. She doesn't know if he was ATF or FBI. She couldn't remember what was on his uniform, but there was a man there that stopped them and told him directly, you're not supposed to be down here.
Right.
And she said that he said it in a way like they knew each other from some other encounter. And she thinks because she was there and he probably didn't want to get her involved in it, that he just said, okay, let's go. And they didn't end up getting those photos. But I think that was the thing that he was trying to raise awareness about specifically. I mean, he said it didn't happen the way they said it did, but then also there was something about the nursery that they were covering up that they didn't want people to know about for whatever the reason was. Maybe it was more bombs in the rubble. I've heard people speculate that there might have been an armory inside of the federal
Right.
building that wasn't exactly legal, that the ATF had explosives and things near that nursery that would have been a big problem. And maybe the truck bomb set off that, and so there's a lot of people, if you go down the road, there's a great documentary called A Noble Lie. And it was made, I think like 6-7 years after the bombing. And it's not a great, it's a well done documentary, but the style of production it doesn't
It's
age
hard.
well.
Yeah.
It can
It's
come
old
across as
school
kind of Alex
YouTube.
Jones,
Yeah.
Right.
and like, which is a shame because there are people in the video. I mean, there's like serious politicians.
Right. Yeah.
There's it actually, if you just turn off the soundtrack and also don't look at the goofy hairdos of some of the people they interview. It's a good investigation
In-depth,
into the bombing, and it raises a lot of questions about what exactly was going on. And I think that some people think that maybe that's what it was, that they were covering up the fact that there were explosives in that rubble, but they weren't Timothy McVeigh's explosive. They were actually the ATF's, and maybe those kids wouldn't have died had they, not had all those bombs in the building. Who knows? I'm not saying I know either way. I just that was what Terrance Yeakey was upset about, something to do with the nursery. And I don't think that his wife, I don't think anybody really ever got to the bottom of it, except that he was also supposed to be meeting with somebody from the FBI
So yeah,
when he was killed.
they talk about it's not Jaina. Is it Davis? Is that the right?
Davis, yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't her. But in the CNN article, they talk about some other journalist that had to move and change her name because of being involved in it,
The harassment that she was getting. Yeah.
And so, but because she was saying that her it kind of became a hub for all these survivors and people she kind of became a go-between for these people to kind of meet and kind of compare notes about not buying it, basically. And so he was involved with her, and she claims that she had a copy of the report, the 12-page report, and all kinds of stuff that all got stolen in the night or something. But anyway, he left her house. And so this is interesting. This is in the CNN article. According to that article, when he left, he said, "I am not going to take my gun because I want to be unarmed so they can't use it against me. Basically saying,
That was a mistake.
well, no, he was basically
In
saying,
hindsight.
I don't want to get suicided, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to take a gun that they can take from me
Yeah.
and then dump me in a. But ultimately, what happened to him, at least, allegedly or maybe.
I
So-
think it clearly looks, if you look at the wounds, I mean, it clearly looks like he was
So-
tortured and murdered in a field.
And that's the other. So that is maybe maybe not a point completely on the other side, but if you were going to suicide somebody, they did a real bad job.
Yeah, this is just the excerpt you're probably talking about. Yeakey seemed conflicted about whether to go meet the men, whoever that is.
They had come to meet her, basically, and then she had shared a bunch of stuff with them because she thought that they were
like other.
Like she assumed they were investigators. I think they presented themselves as investigators. I don't know. It's in there, but essentially she had met with him and then he was going to go meet with him too.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
McDonald said that Yeakey went to the meeting unarmed so no one could use his own gun against him.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're right.
So that's a pretty interesting thing I didn't know until today. Yeah. Like I had, even when we looked at it before, I didn't catch that. So, well, that was after we did a podcast about it. Yeah. That CNN article.
That's pretty wild.
So it's interesting to me that it was so obviously sus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this guy.
That's my main point. It's like, it's obviously suspicious.
Like the Barnett, this Boeing guy from just the other day, it seems pretty plausible. He's in his truck in Charleston. And as far as I know, I don't know the ins and outs of that, but like, let's say you find a guy in his truck, single gunshot wound, gun in the floorboard. This guy killed himself. Yep. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. But like slashing arms and
there
necks.
is nothing about Yeakey's story that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It looks top to bottom, like you said, a sloppy murder tried to be framed as a suicide. And then obviously a corrupt police department covering it up.
It just seems real weird.
I'm not going to be driving through Oklahoma City.
It does just seem weird. It just seems weird that it was such a botched, if, he had either completely lost it. You know what I mean? And even then it just doesn't match up. I don't know. A lot of the details just aren't released as far as I can tell. But like, they did release all the, slashing himself. Like, even if he wanted to make it look like a murder, like he's crazy. Like, I'm just trying to go down to some crazy. I'm trying to go to Crazy Town. Yeah. And so like,
it's a lot to go through.
It just seems like a lot.
And what's the end goal here? To say I'm going to crazy murder myself?
Right. I mean, I don't know. It was just and from everything that I've heard, it doesn't sound like he was, I mean, even if let's say he's paranoid, it doesn't sound like he's just out of his mind. Like, you know what I mean? Like she's like, we need to get married so that we can have, you know what I mean? Like he's thinking things through, it seems. And he wasn't kicked off the police force. He was still about to get a medal
of honor or something.
Yeah. And so, it doesn't, so many things don't make sense to where it just comes back to this whole like, well, if it was this weird, just investigate it so that it takes the questions out of it.
Now here's a direction.
And then some guys won't be sitting around 30 years going, what happened to this guy?
So here's a direction. You might not have ever heard about this or thought about this, but okay. So if he was suicided, meaning maybe there's a major cover up. Okay. I think there was a major cover up actually. And I didn't think about it really, like it didn't hit me how possible that is until a few years ago when I read Tom O'Neill's book about Jolly West. Now, you know Jolly West, right?
I don't know if I do.
So, oh God, I got to catch up real quick. Psychiatrist after the Korean War, based at OU Medicine in Oklahoma City, head of psychiatry at OU Medicine. Now, after the fact, realized he was the MK Ultra doctor.
Okay.
Like he was the guy doing illegal experiments in Oklahoma City. He's the guy that gave LSD to Tusko the elephant and killed him in Oklahoma City Zoo.
Okay.
You know anything about this?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's also the guy that for some reason when the media, when Jack Ruby shoots Lee Harvey Oswald, they immediately rush Jolly West down to Dallas, Texas, and he has to meet with Jack Ruby. And nobody said Jack Ruby was crazy until Jolly West met with him, and he claimed that he's had a psychotic break and that he can't stand trial. He can't be a witness. He's absolutely out of his mind. He says that he's in his jail cell ranting about Nazis outside murdering children. And that's Jolly West.
Okay.
Okay.
The name is familiar now. That right.
Jolly West, you look up the exact amount. When I heard this, it blew my mind. Also met with Timothy McVeigh 17 times while he was in custody. So in the 70s, they had the church hearings, and the CIA admitted to MK Ultra as a program. They admitted to many of the things that they were doing that they shouldn't have been doing, and they claimed that the program was dead. Well, shocker, conspiracy dads, they just changed the name. Whatever they were doing worked, and they probably continued doing it in a lot of circumstances. And I think that Timothy McVeigh was a form of MK Ultra. I think that because the MK Ultra doctor was meeting with him.
Yeah.
And then you think, well, why would Jolly West be meeting with Timothy McVeigh?
Yeah.
I mean, at the time we wouldn't know it. Like it's like, well,
just imagine
he's just a famous Oklahoma psychiatrist.
Right. Just imagine he's a totally innocent guy. What a life.
Yeah.
Be front and center to the wildest stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not just that. He was also involved with, there's that other famous case where the woman was brainwashed by the cult and shot a bunch. She was the heiress to some fortune.
Oh gosh, I would have been able to think of it.
He was
25
used.
seconds
I
ago.
mean, it was pretty much like every time there was some weird thing like that.
Yeah.
The CIA called him up and he'd like show up and he'd do his thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, how big was, and if you get into like who Timothy, there's also, if you listen on Corbett Report, he did a full episode on Timothy McVeigh that raises a lot of questions about who exactly was that guy. What was, the picture that we're painted of who he was is just silly, I think, compared to he was on Schwarzkopf's personal detail in Saudi Arabia. Like he was a very elite soldier. He was not.
Well,
they claim that he was a washout, that he tried to be a ranger and he couldn't cut it. But his family actually claims that he communicated things to them that said something completely different, that he was actually picked out of his unit to be a part of some other black program that, who knows if that's true or not, but Alex Jones found video of him in a tank.
I was about to say that. I think that's in A Noble Lie, isn't it?
I don't know if it might be.
There is some, there is some video of him floating around out there somewhere.
When he was supposed to have, left the military, and then he's caught on camera in a tank
in uniform
in the military state.
And it was somebody who was scouting movie locations. So it was some director, and they just had like a camcorder basically,
You never seen this?
No,
and
I don't think I have.
They
seen
go
this,
into the back of it's like one of those like half tracks where there's, I think it's like treads on the back and tires on the front, but you can stand up in it. So the guy comes around the corner and you're looking in there, and there's a guy in fatigues working on stuff.
Yeah.
And he turns around.
It's Timothy
and
McVeigh.
man, if it's not, it's just like him. And you look at, and he had a very unique face. Like he kind of had a long face.
Right.
He's not kind of an everyman. He kind of has a look, and like he looks right at him.
He says, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm nobody. I'm just moving this tank or something."
Yeah.
You could see him become nervous the moment he sees the camera. Like, I'm the guy who's not supposed to be on camera. Please look at someone else.
It's a real, out of all the stuff I've seen, it's like straight up, because if it's either the time is wrong and it's some video of him from before, or somebody that looks just like him, or it's freaking him and he's not supposed to be in the military, in the army by then or whenever.
There are, again, we could do a whole podcast on Oklahoma City bombing. There are a lot of conspiracy theories about what exactly happened. Everything from Elohim City and Andy the German. I don't know if you know that theory about there's a German spy. I mean, it sounds so strange. If you're from Oklahoma, knowing this, there was like a militia camp outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, called Elohim City, with a lot of, neo-Nazi militants. And for some reason, this German spy was hanging out there and like associating with them. And then after the bombing, he's immediately whisked back to Germany and no one wants to talk to him. But he was associating with Timothy McVeigh,
Right.
is the thing. And he was actually seen with Timothy McVeigh at a strip club here in Tulsa that's still there, Lady Godiva's.
Oh, wow.
He was seen there weeks leading up to the bombing with Andy the German.
I'm only laughing because I've heard some of the podcasts.
You used to work right down the street from there, didn't you?
Yeah, I didn't work at Lady Godiva.
No, I didn't mean to imply that.
But it is funny to hear people from outside of Tulsa say he went to this place called Lady Godiva's, and being local, you're like, yo, yeah. Elohim City, I hadn't heard of, but I Google mapped it and I was like, well, what do you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty bizarre. So
Yeah.
I don't know, as far as Terrance Yeakey goes, I mean, what do you guys think? If you had to be a conspiracy dad or a conspiracy non-dad, what would you say might have been going on there? Les, you want to take a stab at that?
To me, I think you could make everything make
I got to swap something real quick. You keep going.
Okay.
We got audio.
To me, I think you could make everything make sense up until the actual scene of the suicide. Like, I think everything is explainable in a way, not completely, but like, you know, like we were talking about earlier, he saw one of the most horrific things you could imagine. Like, you know, talking about my teacher, one of the stories he told was he knew one of his friends had a friend who was part of the coroner's office, and his job for an afternoon was literally to pick teeth out of a wall with needle nose pliers.
Oh my God.
Like just horrific things. And kids, like, you know, just awfulness. Right. So let's say, okay, he goes there, he's hurt very early. He can't help. He, you know, and it was a back injury. So it's like, as somebody who has a bad back, like you feel stupid for no reason. You know what I mean? Like, you mess up your back and you're like, you idiot. And then, you know, at least in my case, it's just you spend a week in a chair and you're just like, why did you do that? But anyway, you know, he's racked with guilt. He saw this horrific thing. He has a break. He gets erratic. He starts all of this stuff. And it's like, okay. And then he kills himself. It's like that story to me is sad and tragic and awful. But okay, I could make some kind of sense.
But the circumstances of the actual death is where it gets weird.
But then you add in, okay, he's supposedly going to meet with these guys that he didn't make up, because other people verify these dudes existed, because this journalist in that CNN article met with them. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think I don't know if they set him up, but like, or she set them up, but that wasn't a figment of him going to this meeting. Was not was not his imagination.
He was going to a meeting.
And so that happens, and then there's all this weirdness where, you know, he bleeds a ton in the car. So he tries to cut himself in the car, I guess, is what they're saying, and it doesn't work. And instead of just doing it there, he just tried to kill himself, right? So his first idea was, I'm going to kill myself in the car by the side of the road, right? And then it doesn't work. And he's like, okay, well, now I'm going to walk a mile into a field. Why would you go out in the field to do it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so
it just doesn't make any sense.
Then he goes over a fence, and then I'd never heard that they recovered the gun. I just thought the last thing I read was that they never said, like, they never released any details. And so that was the last thing I read today. But like, it's like, okay, well, just release the details.
Yeah.
Like, that's how you put this to bed, is you just say, well, here's what he did. He went from here to here. He did this.
First Lady of France, just let us see a video of your brother and you standing together, and then we'll just shut up about the whole conspiracy.
Right. I think you hit on something pretty important, though, a little earlier, where you were saying, typically my understanding is if a police officer gets killed, like, it's full force of the law, you know, we're going to investigate
a
this
hero
to the very end.
Police officer.
Yeah. Well, any police officer, but you're right. Particularly one that's like,
you definitely don't want like your other police officers on the force to get the idea that sometimes we have officers get killed in mysterious ways and we just don't really investigate it that much.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
at that point, your best officers probably start leaving pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that to me is like I've really tried to I really do try to like try to find the debunk, try to give the argument against the best
Yeah.
chance that there is. But this one is so it just does not make sense to me that if it's all what they said it was, that they wouldn't just document it, at least to their family.
Mhm.
Right.
Tell his family, here's what happened, here's where we found the gun, but they didn't even tell his family. And in fact,
they went out of their way to tell his family, you're crazy.
Right.
Like, you're crazy for saying somebody murdered your brother.
And so you have, and then with his wife, and I guess since they technically weren't married, I could see that being some kind of barrier. But like, she had to like go digging for details about stuff. But his parents couldn't, you know what I mean? Same thing. His parents should have access to that if his ex-wife couldn't get details. But if you're not covering something up, don't do everything to make it look like you're covering things up. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. So on a scale of 1 to 10, conspiracy, non-conspiracy, where are you?
I mean, it's got. I'm at least an 8.
Okay.
I'm at
Conspiracy.
least a solid. I think I'm an 8, 7 or 8. Because
Unless there's some really great evidence that puts things to rest.
Yeah, there could be some key thing. There could literally be a single sentence written somewhere that makes something make sense. I don't see how in this particular case.
That was another thing,
that's
though.
happened to me before.
No suicide letter.
Yeah, there was no.
Which, not hard fast, but.
No, but I did think earlier when you were going, well, it's implausible, but what if there was some kind of like plan he had to make it look like a suicide? It was a crazy plan that he didn't execute.
I'm just now thinking, I wonder how that would affect his insurance policy if he commits suicide versus murder.
Yeah.
Do you know if like it's suicide, you void the policy?
I was going to say there are policies. Suicide. Yeah.
Okay, so right there, that makes zero sense. The guy that was worried about his wife getting his insurance money,
I didn't think about that way.
Suicide? It's the last thing he would have done.
Yeah, but unless he was trying to make it look like a murder.
Right. God, I would have.
Yeah, no.
There is
I mean, if you're going to make it look like a murder, you would just shoot yourself in the head. You wouldn't cut your wrist in your throat. That he clearly, whatever happened was made to look like a suicide, and it clearly wasn't. And if it affected his insurance, boy, that was not a suicide. I guess I'm giving my opinion right now.
Yeah.
Not a suicide. Dave, do you got an opinion?
Well, just thinking about insurance, I'm curious how things would have shook out if they would have called it a murder, if the insurance would have investigated, because they wouldn't have wanted to pay out the policy. Like, well, how would that have gone?
Meaning the police department. Oh.
Yeah.
So, I guess you could say, because I mean, it's not unheard of for insurance fraud for somebody to try to commit suicide or disappear.
Sure. Yeah.
But they don't want to commit suicide because it voids their policy. Right. So if he wanted to take care of his kids in the long run.
No, but if Oklahoma City Police Department didn't want to pay out that insurance, they just. They called it suicide.
But it's the insurance company that pays.
Right. So it would have been. Department. So I could see. So in this scenario, he's losing it or whatever. He's concerned about his kid's future. But he knows that if he commits suicide, there's no payout for them.
But if it was a murder...
But if it's a murder, there is a payout.
They would pay out. So
it just seems like if you're an award-winning police officer with close to 10 years of experience, you would have gone about it a little bit
Done a better job.
Yeah, because you would go, well, they're definitely going to check this, that, and the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted it to look like a murder... then I'm going to have to do a few things.
Just noticed your hat. What an appropriate hat to wear on the Conspiracy Dad podcast. It's great.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion?
I think Les articulated it all pretty well.
Yeah, but on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 conspiracy, 1, nothing to see here.
I'm probably at a 9, but that's generally how I go with these.
I usually get him to about a 9. Yeah. He used to think we landed on the moon. Right?
Yeah.
I got
a story
about
the moon landing. But yeah, the workflow for this typically is you go, have you heard of this? I say no. And then in the days leading up to it, I just guzzle all the content I can find on it. And so by the time I get here, I'm completely strung out.
Right.
And so again, I did it today. I've just been dove into Alex Jones and Corbett and YouTube and everything else. So I'm on a 9 right now, but check with me in a couple days. I don't think I'll be at a 3. I think,
Right.
you know,
It'd be hard to say, yeah, nothing to see here. Well,
yeah.
what was your moon landing story? Is it too long to share?
I can give a real short thing.
Okay.
It's just we've talked before about how I completely dismissed the moon landing being faked as like that's a ridiculous thing to say. Of course we landed on the moon. And then, you know, since we've done our podcast on it, I've converted.
Mhm.
And anytime I make buddies outside of here that are like kind of into conspiracy stuff, that's kind of one of my go-tos because that's probably the one I'm most bought in on.
Mm.
And we're in the green room at church this weekend, and a lot of the guys in the band know that I don't believe in the moon landing, and so they don't bring it up because they don't want to hear all of my nonsense. We had a new girl singing this week, and she made the mistake of as as vehement as we are that we did not land on the moon. She didn't know my position, and she
It's like
just
my uncle worked.
she just volunteered, and she goes, somebody said something about moon landing, and then that girl just piped up and goes, that is the silliest thing I've ever heard. If you look at the photo lens this and they couldn't fake that and this and
Yeah.
that. And I never get involved. I usually have
You are,
presence of mind, and I
Mm.
just was sitting there like I could hear, I could feel like this pressure rising, and I just go,
Right.
what about the radiation belts? And I looked at my guitar player buddy, and he was kind of like, don't do it. I can't help it. It went from there, but that was kind of like I just boiled over.
You're a conspiracy
Yeah.
dad. Welcome.
Yeah.
You know, it's happened. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us on this podcast. Les, will you come back and join us again sometime?
Sure.
Hope you enjoyed
Love
it.
it, yeah.
We like to talk about conspiracies, so
Mhm.
anytime. Thank you for watching. If you guys enjoy the show, please share it, like, subscribe, do all the stuff that all the other YouTubers tell you to do
Mhm.
to share your podcast. But most importantly, yeah, comment and tell us if you guys have a conspiracy that you want us to look into, and it's interesting. We'll look into it, I guess. So anyway, thanks for joining us. See you next time.